Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. We will begin the meeting. If you could please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Thank you. First item of business is a roll call. Mr. Moran, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, Sherry Bilderback. Not here. Mark Cavaza.
Here.
Matt Foreman.
Here.
Jeff Hunt.
Here.
Carl Carlin.
Here.
Jeff Moore. Here. Paul Moran. Here. Hart Nelson.
Here.
John Nurnberger. Lisa Sharing. No. And John Ritter on Zoom.
Here.
Thank you, John. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or adjustments to the agenda?
I'd like to make an amendment. Agenda.
To the
Sorry.
agenda. Seeing none, any objections to approving the agenda by acclamation? No objections. The agenda is approved. Next item of business is the approval of the minutes from the November 9th, 2022 meeting. Those meeting minutes have been distributed. Hopefully everyone has a chance to review them. Are there any amendments or changes for the minutes?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to amend the minutes to include my name in the roll call.
The motion has been made. Actually, I don't believe there's a second. Can we just have that correction made? And other than that, any other corrections or changes? Mr. Moore?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a correction to the roll call in that I arrived well before 7:01 p.m.
It depends whose watch you're using.
Please scratch.
I think we
I
could,
think it was Jeff Hunt that arrived, wasn't it?
that
That
could have been.
explains two things.
That's it. So could we make those adjustments? So it would be Commissioner Hunt that arrived at 7:06. Is that what was recorded there?
7:01.
7:01, all right. And that Commissioner Moore was there on time.
Thank you.
Any other corrections or changes? Seeing none, if we can have the minutes reflect that, and then any objections to staff making that correction, and we can approve those minutes at that, with that, those changes. All right. Minutes are then approved with those changes recommended. Next item of business, do we have any citizens wishing to address the commission on any topics not on the agenda? Seeing none, moving on. This will be no old business. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you raise your hand? My apologies, sir, please. If you could come forward, please state your name, your address. And my apologies. Thank you very much, please.
My name's Anthony George. I live at 9137 Lawn Avenue. I'm just curious if there are any updates with Brentwood Bound and Green Street development.
It's a good question. We have had some conversations about that, and actually the person who would be most able to inform you on that, one of the commissioners, is not here this evening. So I will turn over to staff and see if we have any updates on Brentwood Bound or the projects there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. All right. And then moving on to old business, no old business. First order of new business is P&Z 22023. This is subdivision review, preliminary and final plat of 9321 Litzinger Road, which is the Mount Calvary Lutheran Church of Brentwood. We will move on first. Actually, is petitioner here this evening? I believe the petitioner's representative had a other engagement, and so unfortunately wasn't able to be here this evening. So we'll move directly to staff report, if we could, please. Yep. Yep.
The staff is co-petitioner, so I'll just be presenting as well. The church has agreed to sell their 4 acres at the rear of the property, which you see on your screen here, to the city for the development of a city park. A parking easement and sharing of the parking lot on the remaining church property will be in place, so we're just creating the subdivision to facilitate that sale of the property. Normally, residential code does require that any property has to be along the street for proper access and width. However, since this is for the purpose of maintaining open space and for city park purposes, that is not needed in this case, and therefore we recommend approval.
Thank you very much. One question on that, Ms. Kelly. Is there an easement that will be included as part of this for access to the park?
It's a shared, it's recorded separately as an agreement between the property owners.
For access to parking?
Yeah,
which
for
would then-
access and parking.
Excellent.
That will also be recorded with the plat itself, so.
Excellent. Appreciate it. Is there a separate staff report, or is that
was-
basically covers it?
That
All right.
was just it.
All right, then
So.
we will turn it over to the commission for questions. Commissioner Moore.
Do we have any idea of what the Parks Department is planning to do with the property? And what I'm driving at is restroom facilities, shelters, that kind of thing, and is there any kind of,
They will start in the 2023, they'll start a new parks master plan that will get into that kind of design issues for this park. So they don't have any hard plans at this time, other than to purchase the land for that park.
it just occurred to me as I'm looking at this plan, or the plat, is if we're not having any cross easements, or excuse me, if there's any direct easement to the property from the street, how do utilities and that kind of thing get addressed?
Theirs is direct access. We've reviewed a a shared parking that provides reciprocal cross-access on their drive from Litzinger Road, and the sharing of their parking lot for the parking and, for the park.
I understand. So digging just a little bit deeper, and just help me understand it. So if there's a restroom facility on there and it requires a sewer outlet, I mean, how do we access that without having a defined easement across their property? Or for that matter, the neighbors on White Avenue or to the sides? I mean, is that something that just gets handled by the utility companies? Or?
Do you want to answer? Or do you- Okay.
Yeah. So, as part of the cross-access easement, we could include utilities. Now, if utilities were not in that specific location, then we would have to obtain a different easement through whatever property would allow us then to connect to either electric or plumbing, water, something like that. So it might be that we would need another easement depending on what they do with the planning or what they do with the master plan next year. But it could also be that the cross-access easement that we have.
That answers my question. I guess I present to the commission whether or not it's something we need to address in this proposal.
I think the question before us is really the subdivision, and so I think, that is in many ways a ministerial. If it meets the requirements, it's a yes. If it doesn't meet the requirements, then it's a no. The staff recommendation, looking at what the requirements are of our ordinances and statute, believe that it meets those requirements. But I do believe it is, a future concern of if this is going to be developed further and not just left as green space and turned into a true park, obviously that's of concern. Or not a concern, but just something that needs to be considered.
And I will certainly pass that on to the other attorney that reviewed that parking agreement and for the facilitation of the sale, and time when we get into those planning stages.
I guess there's a question, Ms. Kelly, which is if development comes before, or if there is an effort or interest in developing this piece of land, would that in fact come before P&Z again?
Correct, it would.
Have the opportunity to address that at that point. This is simply the subdivision of the plat.
Thank you, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Moran.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Have we consulted and kind of got the approval of the neighbours on Parkside, Park Ridge and White?
We sent out a public notice for this, and I did receive questions, but no specific comments were provided.
Okay, thank you.
Is the typical distance from the...
300
feet.
300, we sent out notices 300 feet surrounding the property. I did receive a question about what is remaining on the church property. The church is planning to remain, and that was the only question they had.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great resolution.
Other questions? Any questions from members of the public? With that, the chair would entertain a motion.
Yeah. I move to approve the 9321 Litzinger subdivision preliminary plat and recommend approval of the final plat as presented in the staff reports and drawings at this meeting. Conditions may be added, eliminated, and altered down the road.
I got a motion by Mr. Moran. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Faza. We'll do I think a voice vote will be fine. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. The ayes carry it since it is a ministerial act. Unless do we need a roll call vote for this? I didn't believe so. Thank you. All right, next up. Thank you, everyone. And get back to my agenda here. Next up is the conditional use permit. This is for the Arts in Motion Children's Dance Studio and Music School at 2949 South Brentwood Boulevard. This is within the Brentwood Commons Shopping Center. I believe the applicant or the representative is present. If you could state your name and address for the commission, and then tell us a little bit about your project.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Jonas. I am the owner and director of Arts in Motion Dance and Music School. So we are here tonight, or I'm here. What brings me here is to request a conditional use permit. We've actually been operating, the studio's been in business for a long time. 1993 was our starting year. I've owned it since 2006. We moved into Brentwood, into that location in 2016. Somehow we were able to get an occupancy permit and proceed and get a business license and everything then, and nothing was brought up about the conditional use until recently. So that's what I'm here to do, is to request we are granted that. As you can see, we have been working in harmony with the other tenants, no complaints. We have a very opposing schedules as far as parking goes. So I'm open to questions, but that's really what brings me here.
Just to make sure we're understanding, so there's no changes to the property. Parking is going to stay the same, the usage is going to stay the same, but it is just, in fact, making sure that conditional use permit is in place.
Bringing it legal, as Ms. Kelly would say.
Excellent, thank you. We'll go to staff report, and then we'll have some questions from the commission here potentially. So staff report, please.
Yes. As the applicant has indicated, they are seeking a conditional use permit at this location at the Brentwood Commons Shopping Center. They located in this space in 2016. However, the business license, she hasn't had an active business license since 2018. And so when it was brought to her attention that she needed to reapply, we did not find any record of a conditional use permit, and therefore that's why we're presenting this to you tonight, to get her fully in compliance with the code. As I said, legal. So she has been operating in this space since 2016. We have not heard of any complaints. The parking is available with the other tenants. There's plenty of parking available on site. And as she did indicate, they are in opposite time frames. The offices, physical therapy offices and stuff is more than day. With her children's dance studio and school, music school, it's more in the evenings. And therefore, we do not see a parking issue with this request. So.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Any questions from members of the commission? Seeing none, any members of the public wishing to address the commission on this petition? And seeing none there, the chair will entertain a motion.
Move to recommend approval of the conditional use permit for Arts in Motion Children's Dance and Music School at 2949 South Brentwood Boulevard within the Brentwood Commons Shopping Center as discussed this evening.
We have a motion by Mr. Faza. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hunt.
Slight notice. I did notice in the staff report there's a section that's carried over from a prior staff report. So I just want to confirm that the conditional use permit is for the Arts in Motion. The hours of operation are 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. I did make that change. It was the first sentence condition that was incorrect. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a copy and paste thing.
Yep, got you.
So.
Yeah, we're good.
I swear I thought I had changed that, so.
All right, motion is the motioner comfortable with with making sure that we're clear in the record?
Yes.
All right. And the second, I believe, was by Mr. Hunt. You're also clear? All right. We'll do, since this is CUP, go to a roll call vote. Mr. Moran, please.
Okay, thank you. Mark Faza,
Yes.
Matt Foreman,
Yes.
Jeff Hunt,
Yes.
Carl Carlin,
Yes.
Jeff Moore,
Yes.
Paul Moran, yes, and John Ritter.
Yes.
Thank you very much, John. That's unanimous, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, making sure that we are all in order, so thank you.
Yeah. This will go for the Board of Aldermen at the January 2nd meeting in January 18th or 17th, I believe, because that Monday is a holiday. So I will keep you posted and get that noticed. So, all right.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Next up, new business. This is P&Z 22025. This is subdivision review, preliminary and final plat to create 3 single-family lots, and this is at 8828 West Pendleton Avenue, Brentwood 63144. Is the petitioner here this evening?
He indicated he'd be available online.
Do we have any other
Zoom.
folks online this evening?
Somebody has a hand up.
Excellent.
Yes. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, please.
And I see it says my wife's name on here, so great. My name is J.R. Mayer, owner of Prestige Custom Homes and the owner of the property at 8828 West Townsend Avenue. The subject property is in the B single-family zoning district, which we are looking to subdivide into 3 separate lots. All 3 lots do meet the minimum requirements for the B single-family district, with our smallest lot being 70 by 100 or 7,000 feet. The B zoning district does, at a minimum, require them to be 40 by 75 or 5,000 square feet. So we do exceed the minimum by quite a bit. And even though the address is West Pendleton, we do intend to have all 3 homes face Collier Avenue. If you have any questions, I am free to answer them.
All right. Any questions from the commission? And we'll go staff report, and then we'll get some questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Again, Whitney Kelly on behalf of the city. As the applicant is indicated, they are seeking to subdivide the parcel at 8828 West Pendleton, into 3 lots, and each of the 3 lots do meet with the minimum requirements of the B single-family district, which requires a minimum of 5,000 square feet. And Lot A and B are both 7,000 square feet, and Lot C is 12,000 square feet. The subdivision code also requires that extra width is provided for any corner lot, and they are showing that here on Lot A. And since all houses are oriented to the front, the width is measured at this part here, which meets the minimum requirement of the code as well. And therefore, we recommend approval.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Now, any questions from members of the commission on this petition? Please.
So given that all 3 face Collier Avenue, the corner lot that's actually onto Pendleton, do you have a plan for where you're making your curb cuts?
Yes, all curb cuts will be along Collier Avenue. The high side of that lot is actually on the southern side of that lot, so it would be a right-hand house. So yes, all 3 curb cuts would be along Collier.
Mr. Foreman, any other questions?
Given that they're 70-foot lots, there's some flexibility there. Just thinking of garage orientations
Yes.
and other elements, but
And this is something, again, is the city has no objections to changing the orientation with curb cuts, because obviously that will be new.
Correct, we don't.
Any other questions, Mr. Foreman?
nope.
All right.
Thank you.
Anything else from the commission? Any members of the public wishing to address the commission on this petition? Seeing none, Chair would entertain a motion.
A question for Ms. Kelly. Is there another copy and paste error in the recommendation language?
No, this one I did double check, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a proposal, Mr. Chairman, to approve the addition to Brentwood Station Block 2, part of Lot 1, preliminary plat. I recommend approval of the final plat as presented in the staff reports and drawings reviewed at this meeting.
We have a motion by Mr. Moran. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Carlin. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Moving on to our last order of new business. This one's going to be a little more detailed. Ms. Kelly, we turn it over to you, but we have a text amendment regarding fence regulations in the city of Brentwood, so we'll turn directly to staff report. And hopefully folks have had a chance to review this. There is a lot in this proposed change, or this review.
Okay. All right, let's see. Okay. So we just wanted to bring this to your attention. The Missouri legislation has adopted new legislation regarding security measures on private property, specifically related to electronic fences and to require that law enforcement and first responders have access to private property. So a lot of the states have, or a lot of the cities have just recodified their current fence regulations in compliance with that. We've had some recent questions come up on fences, so we thought it would be a good time to revisit those. We had a recent, so I wanted to go into all of the requirements for a fence. There was a recent zoning variance request, particularly on corner lots, and then there was a question of what is a fence versus any screening. So Section 400, I won't go into each section because you can see it here, but the Brentwood City Code requires that any corner lot shall have a side yard equal in width to the front yard setback along any street right of way. Frontage is defined as a lot fronting along any public or private right of way, and therefore we sometimes would call it a side yard equivalent to a front yard setback, depending on the orientation of a home. And the code states that no fence shall be erected, constructed, maintained within a front yard within any dwelling district. Except for under certain specific requirements, that it be 50% open, that it's ornamental in design, and no more than 24 inches in height. Screening devices are also considered within that same category, where any fence, wall, screening device does require a permit. So, and that and under the development standards of accessory structures, any fence or wall located within a required side, rear, or front yard setback shall not exceed 6 feet in height. So the zoning variance request was, you can see here, was to the side and rear of the home, and the applicant wanted to enclose his backyard and go to the actual property line. The zoning board, or Board of Adjustment, questioned whether the intent was really to consider this a front yard, as there were other properties in the area that also had fences that were right up to the property line along the street as well. Those could have been pre-existing non-conforming. And the overall intent is you don't generally want to block the visibility of the home that has any frontage or feel like they're being cornered in, boxed in, so as you can see. So then we had a resident start a construction of a fence without a permit, and he's saying that this was not a fence, that it's a screen, and therefore he had confusion about whether it was actually a fence or not. It is parallel to the property line, which and is clearly over 2 feet. So therefore, we felt that it did still require a permit. But it is important to note that the yard requirements state that every part of a required yard must be open to the sky and unobstructed except for permitted fences, walls, hedges, signs, off-street parking. And that no fence, wall, or exterior partition shall be erected without a first filing for an application with the board, with our department. And that the definition of a division fence or division screen is any partition erected parallel to and along a property line and setting off the property of one or persons from that of another. And so while the design of this screen or fence, however you want to define it, or call it, may not fully enclose, it was seen as being a fence and or screen and therefore required a permit. So we can certainly clarify the language instead of a fence, calling it all of those categories, fence, wall, screens, as just a fence permit. We can certainly clarify that language. Or if you want to see about allowing for other things to be within the setback, we can certainly look at that as well. But we did also want to get into building code and safety codes. A fence is also required around a pool. The code says that for pools, there shall be a 4 to 6 foot solid fence where adjacent to residents to provide for privacy. The building code requires a 48-inch self-latching closing and self-latching mechanism or electronic pool covering. So the interior pool barrier that is separating the pool from the yard can be the more wrought iron style, and we've said that the perimeter can be a solid fence, and that would meet the intent of the code. However, we did get a request to relook at that because the property that backs up to the Brentwood Forest area, or Brentwood, the Brentwood Forest, she's like, why would I need a privacy fence back up here? So we could look at clarifying that as well if you wanted us to reconsider that, as long as it meets with the building code requirements. Do we need a separate fence for privacy?
And this wasn't in the case of a swimming pool, is that correct?
It was in the case of a swimming pool.
It was in the case
Yes.
of a swimming pool. Okay. I have some ideas on that. All right.
Okay. So we wanted to bring it to your attention. These are the issues we've seen this year so far. And if there was anything else that y'all would like us to consider, and then starting in the new year, we would bring forth an ordinance with those changes.
So let me be clear for everyone here of what the intent of what we're trying to accomplish tonight. A, we're not finishing this tonight. This is a big meaty piece, and I think we're going to look at our next meeting as well to have this conversation, but we want to get it started. So A, we're not under a time pressure. Number two is, this is for us to provide recommendations on the direction that we think staff would like to go, or we would like staff to go with an ordinance that will be presented to us for consideration, and then we'll go to the Board of Aldermen. And as everyone knows, with ordinances, we have recommendations. They can decide to do with the Board of Aldermen, who are the electeds, what they'd like to do with that. But at least they'd like to see our recommendations. So that's what we're trying to accomplish this evening, is to provide that input. We've seen some examples there where we do have, fencing is a side yard, a front yard. I happen to know that's a property that's along High School, right? So you do have a lot of foot traffic, and the question is, are you able to fence off your backyard? Is that our intent? Or are we treating a side yard like a front yard where you do have to have the setback? And noting, I believe that the petitioner or the applicant said, hey, there's other instances like this along this street. They're literally right down the road. There's some that have additional setback, and there's some that are right up on the property line. So it's been allowed to happen. Will put out, I guess with the bully pulpit here, I think there's a difference regardless of whether or not you back up to Brentwood Forest with a completely screened fence or a wrought iron type fence. Some of that is to prevent people from getting into your pool for safety reasons. And so if you have a small child, there may not need to be or shouldn't be back in Brentwood Forest area, but if they're able to get through those bars, and there are some small kids out there and get into your pool, that is the reason why I think we require a solid fence. And so I'm not sure that we would want to change that, but that's
the reason for the building code fence.
Right.
That can be an electronic cover or a minimum of a 48-inch.
Gotcha.
Self-latching, which can be a more open design.
Gotcha.
Where under the section that requires under section for accessory uses and structures, 400-2100, it requires specifically that it be screened from adjacent residential property of a solid fence. So sometimes if the fence and the pool barrier safety code, the building code safety code regulations is that the pool barrier fence is enclosing just the pool. So somebody could be playing in the yard and it's separating the children from in the yard to the pool. So the question is, that means, does it really need the separate perimeter fence? So in some cases we've said, well, the perimeter fence is a solid wood fence, so that meets with the intent of providing privacy to the adjacent residents. The resident in this case said, well, I don't really need privacy to the.
Because I don't back onto a residential property, even if it's zone residential.
Correct.
Right? There's nothing built there. That makes sense. That's a good point as well. All right, so that's it. Mr. Foreman.
I would expand on that just a bit, because you were spot on with the building code is bringing this up specifically for a life safety purpose to keep small children out. I also unfortunately know that the building code gets very specific on things like guardrails versus handrails, and there are very specific definitions. So when you refer to the wrought iron fence and small children getting through, maybe we want to actually reference sections of the international code that would limit the spacing of the pickets to 4 inches on center, which is what the code requirement is for a guardrail on a balcony to keep a small child from falling off. So I believe we could cross-reference there and kind of get some clarity on what that could mean. And that would serve in case where you don't want a solid privacy fence, but you want a fence that meets a life safety requirement.
The other piece I think would be the screen, and just to making sure I'm understanding from what I read of the definition of a screen. I have seen some definitions in the material you presented, an ordinance of a 50% coverage. That's normally the definition of a. Is there a consistent definition within our ordinances of what a screen? I know that you're saying no, there isn't. That's why we need to adjust that. But do we have any definition? It may not be consistent, but do we have any definition of a screen that maybe we can look at?
We do not have a definition of a screen. All it says is that any fence constructed within the required front yard shall be ornamental fence and not exceed 24 inches and at least 50% open. I think the section you're actually referring to was a different section. Let me get to it.
That was probably the one I might have been conflating some things.
The fence regulations do say that for any fences, I think it's under the actual fencing language, where you're limited to 6 feet in height for a solid fence, and then you can ask for an additional 2 feet, provided the to 8 feet, provided the upper 2 part is 50% open.
Yeah. But that isn't a screen. It's basically
that's more separately a free. Yeah, so that's still a fence, but not within the setback. There was a question about, I want to just enclose the underside of my deck, but your fence regulations don't allow that. And I said, well, that's not really a fence regulation. That's just modifying the deck. It's just a building permit.
Right.
So how it's applied is how what they present to us is how we review those.
And I would offer that that's where a better definition of screen could serve to help facilitate the conversation. Because a screen, where if you're looking, and you started off speaking about security ordinances for the state, I would assume a screen doesn't necessarily fully enclose. I would also cross-reference that there are times where the Architectural Review Board specifically asks applicants to screen
Yep.
the bottom side of decks, porches,
Right.
other pieces
Do it here
like
for
that.
trash enclosures and things like
Yeah,
that, so yes.
that's generally, yeah.
And I think that your reference to the openness is also spot on versus, so there's openness and then we jump straight to solid fencing.
Well,
It probably needs a little more,
so there's probably a
finessing of the
screen
language.
fence, which is a term I've heard used, right? Which does both of those things. It seems like there's if you have an enclosed fence, that's a security issue, right? And if you have a screen that encloses, that's another level of security and screening. And it also
It's-
seems, yeah.
unless it's only a screen to serve as a visual function and doesn't actually fully enclose.
Right, but it's likely harder to get through a screen if it encloses than it is to get through a fence, for instance. Having hopped over many chain link fences in my life, I can. And I think also the inclusion that we have seems to be about modesty, right, for the pools. It's like not so your neighbors don't see you in your swim trunks. Is that essentially the intent? That's how it reads, right?
I'm assuming the intent was to provide privacy.
Privacy,
Yeah.
yes.
Right, but
To
again,
those
if
that
I
maybe-
have the pool and I don't care about privacy, then why am I building a fence? It's for
Right.
my neighbors that I'm being made to build the fence. That's
Yeah, but the
only way it
inverse
makes-
is true as
yeah.
well. If I want a pool, but I'm concerned, I want the ability to put up a solid fence to protect my modesty.
Well, this requires you to do it though, whether you want to or not,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
So it's for the neighbors, it's not for me,
right.
right? So, yeah.
Nobody actually
Without
wants
safety.
to
I mean,
see.
the safety issue is there, but that's required of
Yeah.
building code, basically.
So then the question is, one of the questions we would answer is, do we need to enforce that modesty or not? That's the question that's being asked on that one. So,
Others? I did notice, actually make sure I noticed, the example that was given in terms of, hey, this is a screen, and I understand that a permit wasn't requested for that, but there was a fence running along, a chain link fence running alongside it? So it just went from chain link completely open to, hey, now I'm going to do this and it's a screen? Was that the understanding, or
Well, and
that was a statement?
So we, not really to,
Okay,
the question became, yeah, it is right along the property line. We assume that the chain link fence is this property owner's
property line there.
fence,
Yeah,
since it turns towards that property.
yep.
There's a gate going the other way.
Yeah,
but if they had pursued a permit, it wouldn't have been an issue, because why couldn't they have a fence there, like?
well, the issue is also that the code requires that any fencing or screen wall be finished to the outside neighbors. So he does still need to provide some slats to have the finished side on the outside. Some cities do also require, and this is something we could consider, that you can't have fences back to back. I don't know if that's something y'all want us to consider, but,
Then we're back to, is it a fence or a screen?
right. Then we get back into the fence of the screen.
Yeah, but that is, I mean, the fence back to back, there's a point. You don't, yeah. What is the definition of fence? I do want to, again, the point of this is to get initial input. We're going to have this conversation next time. I think I ask that everyone be thinking about this. Rocky, I don't want to forget you because I know that you're on the screen and I forget that a lot. So raise your hand, wave if you've got some input. Actually, I'd like to hear from if you've got any, and then we'll go around a little bit.
I am good as right now.
Okay.
Thinking off the top of my head with the back-to-back regardless of screen or fence. Because I've heard other instances where this has come up just because of what I do. And there are issues with property lines, or I want my privacy fence here. The other fence actually belongs to the other homeowner. We might want to consider some measures to make that a maintenance-free strip in between. That's really part of the issue, is if the weeds are growing back there and it's between the fences, but I'm the second one to install, am I required to put pavers or gravel or weed stop in between?
I want to make sure we're not increasing the scope of what we're being asked to do here as well, though. But I get that. But I do think that is a consideration. We need to consider, I guess, second order effects of what we're looking to do here.
Yeah, and if the question is that we're trying to streamline and clean up and improve the fencing requirements, then it would seem like that would be be a fair thing to talk about, right? I think just thinking logically about it, if you can only have one fence along a line, you're sort of requiring everybody to get along, right? You're sort of saying like, you guys go work it out.
Right.
And maybe that can't be done all the time. If someone wants like an ornamental iron fence and I want a privacy fence and now I can't because they already put it in first, like that won't work. There has to be some accommodation for people who don't get along, I think.
I'll also qualify this with up to about 12 or 15 years ago, the Architectural Review Board did review fences, and we worked hard to get that off of what the Architectural Review Board was reviewing. So,
A proverb in there about good fences make good neighbors or something like that, but anyway.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other comment? Mr. Favazzo?
Yeah, I've actually had the situation in my old house where I had a privacy fence and they built a privacy fence right up against mine, but the backyards didn't line up perfectly, so their neighbor actually had a chain link fence, so if they would have had to keep my fence, there would have been a little corner of chain link, and then there would have been privacy, so another thing to consider.
Is the definition of fence in 400.020, is that the only definition of fence?
Yes.
So that's talking specifically about a division fence versus maybe any other kind, like a pool fence, right?
Right.
And maybe it's just the lawyer in me, but the way it's defined, to be a fence, it has to run parallel to and along a property line.
That's just that's just a division fence is how it's being defined. It says division fence or division screen. Any partition erected parallel to and along a property line and setting off the property of one person from that of another person. However, under the fence regulations, you have different categories of fences, such as swimming pool fences, tennis court fences that aren't necessarily a division fence or right at the property line, but it's still dividing the swimming pool from the yard, or tennis courts and keeping the balls from the tennis courts into the, yeah. So, and then you have screening devices as well that include fences, walls, trees, shrubbery, grade changes, discussion, retaining walls, and any other screening device. That says any screening device, fence, or masonry wall shall be kept in good repair, that kind of thing. So there's no specific definition for those. We can certainly start look into that and look at providing that.
But I think to Mr. Hunt's point, anything that's running along that property line is either a fence or a screen, because we just have defined it as either a division fence or a division screen. Is that?
And if it doesn't run parallel to the property line, it's not a division fence, even if it would otherwise.
I think that might be the case. Is it still a fence or a screen is still up for debate, because have we defined actually what a fence is, right? So, I mean, it's you can say that's a partition erected parallel. It's got to be one of those two things. I think the argument was, it's not a fence, it's a screen. Okay, well then, sounds like we need some work to define what a screen is, but it's one of those two things.
Begs a question in my mind, which would be like, if my yard's large enough to want to put, like, let's say a small, vegetable garden in, and I want to build something, I'm saying something around it to keep rabbits out or something, like, does that require a permit? Does that fall under any of these requirements? Like, how do I?
We would certainly want to look at it, to look at where it is on the property, to see if it's within a setback. And it's also about the safety, that it's properly anchored, it's not going to fly off during a heavy windstorm and hit somebody or damage somebody else's property, and that any finished side, if it is close to the property line, and that any finished side is facing out, so that the nice side is to the residents and how it's impacting the adjacent properties.
So what I hear is the city does have both a health and safety as well as a kind of aesthetics, property value interest in those sorts of things.
But so when we're not answering it tonight, but when does it rise to the level of enforcement? Because let's say I pound some of those stakes in the corners and put chicken wire around it. Is it a fence?
Is it permanent or is it seasonal?
Yeah.
Right. We've in some of the particular cases that we've had recently, it's like once you've permanently embedded it into the ground, that's when it needs a
putting
permit.
concrete in.
Yeah,
If it's got a foundation is typically our benchmark, but.
yeah.
Well, so, and again, I am being pedantic, I don't mean to be. Like, you know, if you're pounding the stick in, is that now in the ground? And does the city really want to read permits for people with chicken wire garden fences? Like, you know, I think these are questions we should answer, probably. Because, I mean, you know, that's like, it's permanent for 2 seasons, and then I forget about it, and I take it out the third, and do we really care? I think it's worth looking at, you know? So.
Can you go back to the big questions page? Because I think that's the one that I wanted to make sure that we think about over the next month. Because we are going to be then coming back, and at that point, and I appreciate the fact that we've had an opportunity to do this for a couple of meetings. These are the kinds of things that we're looking for input on. The corner lots one I think is a tough one. I will say, having gone down that particular road where this question came up a number of times, I can understand with the high pedestrian traffic volume and the fact that your side yard is used very much as a backyard, that there could be some value in making sure that you can provide some privacy to your backyard, and that may need to be updated. But
What would be the reason to not do that, I guess? Like, why would we not want to approve that?
sightlines, I mean, you've got some safety issues there.
Sight lines, if it's a corner lot and you have a house fronting on that side street, then you're effectively all of a sudden, oh, I got this 6-foot wall right there, and when I'm trying to back out of my driveway.
Yep.
So that is one that I think might require the most discussion. It could also be the one that we keep as is, and each case is reviewed at the Board of Adjustment on the individual case merits. Like if there's no other house fronting then, that's something in this case, they did approve it because there were no other houses actually fronting, the front door fronting on that side street. So they felt that was fine in this case.
But there is some significant sightline issues.
Yeah.
If you take a look at density and that making that will approve in every case. Again, high pedestrian areas especially, you're coming out, you can't see where people are walking. I think there's some concerns and some safety concerns there.
Other thoughts come to mind under any other comments? Having worked with ordinances a lot, I've seen very clear definitions where the height is above grade, not I snuck in a retaining wall 2 feet high and then I put a 6-foot high fence on top of it.
Correct. In those instances, we would view that as we would still bring that forward. And that's the other thing is, if we want more of if we still want to be able to review these things, but not have to go through the particular hardship that is created through the zoning, it could be something that is brought back under certain circumstances at this P&Z level or at the Architectural Review Board level. That is certainly how we did it in a prior city that I worked at. On corner lots, we did come up with some regulations that we would allow at staff, that it was, picket 4 feet high and not 2 feet. And it's clearly to the side and rear. So it allowed visibility over it. We could look at providing that, and then any other case needs to either get a variance or come before.
What was the method of redress for that? If it was basically staff review, then there was still a method of redress through?
In that case, the city did not have an architectural review board, so that went to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Okay. So.
Also,
Mr.
for whatever reason, 2 feet just seems like a really weird number. So it's like Gulliver's Travels or something. Like I think we could probably do better than that.
Yeah, we can certainly look at 4 feet. Yeah.
Because 3 feet, 3 feet at least is like a guard height. It's like
I'm gonna say 3 feet is like you buy that out of the catalog. You
Yeah.
get the chain link at 3 feet high. If you try to buy a chain link fence 2 feet high, you're gonna have conversations
2
with your
feet's kind of a
contractor.
weird thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Moran, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can I just ask this could become a death spiral discussion at every single future P&Z meeting, right? There's so many different opinions and viewpoints. Is there a best in class boilerplate ordinance around fencing that we could get from one of the other 91 or 2 St. Louis whatever the number is, municipalities that we could just copy from start with, right? Otherwise, we're going to keep on adding these little subsections, and it's okay, but more about this, and it's going to be like the Bible.
Yeah.
Eventually, and just about fences. That's the screening one will be also that size as well, right?
We haven't even talked about what color to paint it yet.
Don't, you're
So-
blowing my mind. Right, and if we can go for clarity and simplicity as much as possible, please, because some of this is like high school Shakespeare when I read it, which I was never very good at, frankly.
So,
And I think if we can just, and if we can just like not think about individual or exceptional cases when we're coming up with a set of rules, right? There should be an appeal process and a variance process, which
Agreed.
we deal with every week, every month, right? So that's all I'm asking for. Thank you.
yeah, so the next steps would be, we could bring forth examples. We would actually draft up certain changes based upon this discussion, and we can start. So the next meeting, we would have a draft ordinance that maybe could help clarify it and get your input on those changes and we'll go from there.
I never do this, but I'm gonna do the whip. Mr. Hunt, anything else? Carlin?
I'm good.
Mr. Foreman, you made my mind race when you spoke of the cinder block wall, 4 feet. Is it 6 now or is it 4? You said above grade. What if it were built on a berm of soil?
Or one lot's higher than the other. Those are all those conditions that frankly I've run into during design process, and you have to get clarification on it. Because if I'm the high side and my neighbor has a retaining wall because they wanted to cut and get a flat yard, and on my side it's at grade and it's 6 feet high, on their side now it's 10 feet tall. So
Down
that's
the rabbit hole.
right where Mr. Moran thought we were going.
Yeah, he's suspicious. Mr. Ritt, sorry, Mr. Moore. Mr. Ritter. Anything else to add on this?
No, I'm stuck in the rabbit hole here.
I think Paul is as well. Mr. Fafaza?
Nope.
Mr. Moran?
Does a soccer goal in your front yard count as a screen or a fence?
Is it permanent or temporary?
Counts as
That
a good
would be-
idea. It's a good idea.
Yeah, that would actually be children's play equipment, which is not part of
Yeah,
this
you're
review.
good. It's Paul playing with
If
it,
it's
though.
made out-
It's-
Depends on the color, right? Right, thank you.
Mr. Foreman?
I think I've spoken enough.
All right. You got the input that you needed at least to
Yes,
start, and we will revisit this next month. So I appreciate this. Yeah, fences is a tough one. That's why we get paid the big bucks. All right. Thanks, everyone. That is all of the new business. We will move to an aldermanic report, but I don't see an alderman. We'll go over to the director's report, please, Ms. Kelly.
So we actually did not receive an application for the January meeting. So we will have this as the
7
whole.
months. 7 months. We've been rolling.
So we will bring this forward to you and have this as the discussion item. If there is something small that comes in quickly, we will try to get it on the agenda, but I'm actually out next week, so noticing for that meeting could be very difficult, so.
I'm sorry, are we going to have a January meeting just about fences?
Yes.
I think I'm sick.
Or
I
if
feel
y'all, if we
something
don't
coming
have
on.
anything prepared in time, we can certainly postpone it to
We
February.
can discuss that if we need to, but
Yeah.
we'll engage with everyone and determine that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other items of business? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn. So a second?
Second.
A second. We are stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.